Welcome to Cancer and Peace. My name is Sean, and I'm here with Peter Scalzo, and we're going to talk about some topic today that is going to probably be different than we've talked about at other times, and that is scars. And so as we were thinking about it, I was looking at my hand here. I have this scar right here. This is where my brother took a knife to me when I was younger, so I have something there. Maybe it represents trauma. I got this scar right here on my arm when I had surgery in my arm for my wrist, and so I got some metal in here, so I got scars on both sides. Yeah. But I'm betting, as somebody who's had as many surgeries as you had, that you have a lot of scars from those surgeries. Mm. And I'm going to bet that that's not what all the topic is about. It's just what to do with those physical scars. So lead us in, oh great leader.
Yeah. So the interesting thing with this discussion is, I'm not sure, listener, if you've noticed, but sometimes we are prepared for our topic and sometimes we are not. So this is one of those topics that we just
blew us up.
This is one of those topics that we just sort of thought about, launched, and so let's see where it goes. Let's see where this goes today. I brought up the topic of scars, and I'm intrigued by what scars mean. I mean, I think scars are definitely reminders of events, of things that have happened. Mm-hmm. And sometimes scars leave a permanent, they're permanent. And it's not just physical scars, but emotional scars also. And what is an emotional scar? That's where you're going to have to weigh in. Oh, wise one.
Or both too. This is an interesting, because when trauma happens to your body, it has these connections. And
so I've myself, I've had many surgeries, and I do have. I think my main scar on my body is one that starts way down and goes way up my abdomen, and it was open 3 times, and it was to be able to totally change my urinary system and take the intestines out of the body, and then use intestinal tissue, cut that up, and use that and reconfigure my ureters and my bladder and all that stuff, besides taking out other things. They took out appendix while they were doing it, and prostate. And sometimes when I'm in an ultrasound, the sonographer will say, wow, it looks pretty empty in there. But anyway, so every day when I take my shower, that means I take a shower every day, Sean. I have an opportunity to look at the front of my body, and I have all kinds of other scars because of tubes and incisions and my back, my front. And my body has changed because of the surgery. Functionally, it's changed. And so when I look at these scars, I have an emotional response, even today.
Yes, that's what I was wondering.
Yes. And most of the time, it's a response of, this has represented loss to me. Most of the time. But it doesn't mean I dwell in sadness. There's also a sense of that there's been a purpose with these scars. There's been a great purpose. And even though these scars represent really tough surgeries and recoveries and all that with cancer, and where suffering and death was always hanging over me, there's also a sense of like, wow, I got through this. This is a scar. God did this, allowed this to happen for a reason, for a purpose. Look at all that has happened because of this. So I don't know if that's a good entrance ramp into this discussion.
We're going to try.
Yeah, you have to make sense of it.
Well, I don't know if I
That's your job.
I don't know if I can or not, but I'm interested in exploring the conversation a bit. Let's say it that way. And I think as we explore scars, you have me thinking about my own scars, and I'm kind of wondering if all physical scars do have an emotional scar with them. I mean, because all physical scars represent a form of trauma to our body, and that means that when we feel trauma, we also feel emotions that had to be managed. And one of the things that you and I had learned, and it's definitely through Nancy was here on trauma side, is that trauma, that when your body does not fully process all of its emotions, then the trauma gets trapped.
Mm.
And then this concept of the body keeps the score is really big. And so I'm interested in how we think about scars, and what immediately came to my mind as you were sharing your own scars, as you were talking about listening, your body, is that I have other scars I didn't mention. I have scars on my neck, like these around here, but I had really bad skin when I was younger, and so I'd have these ruptures, and some of them created scarring. And well, during the summertime, I get enough sun that my neck will tan or even get red, and the scars don't. Scars don't tan. They don't take on, whatever their makeup is. That and I didn't know that until later in life, but they don't change in color with the sun, and it's something to do with their makeup. And what I recognize is that though they represent something in my life, but that was traumatic in that experience of, and it has to do with not feeling enough. Like when you have skin issues, or like as a teenager or whatever, I was made fun of for that. And even today, it's like I'd gone to the dermatologist, and he's like, I can probably do something with that, to deal with and there was a question of, well, do I need to? And why would I even worry about it now? And I think the answer to that is not so much about the physical, but is there stored trauma there that hasn't been processed? And it could
Mm.
be
Mm.
how I felt about and my identity. Is my identity tied in that scar, that in a way that I'm less than, or what other people said I was, um, due to the makeup of that. And one of the things I thought about for a cancer patient is that, and you have said this to me a few times, is that you have an identity shift.
Mm.
And the identity shift is a traumatic identity shift because it gets foisted on you the same way. I couldn't do anything about, my own physical skin makeup. It was foisted on me. It's just a reality of my DNA makeup. And going through that, I had to know what my identity is. And I think this is really important for, do your scars tell you who you are, or where does your identity come from? And I think the only way you know that is by processing whatever pain or emotions are behind those scars. And so I'm going to go back to you. How did you process the pain or emotions behind those scars? Because it may well answer some of that question, because I think there's probably a tie. I think all the scars that I have in my own body, the ones I can think of that stick out to me, having my hand cut with a knife was a significant event, because it was, with my brother. Going through surgery on my wrist and having both sides has given a limit, because my wrist lost half of its mobility. And so I always see something that's defective compared to where it was. I lost something. And a cancer patient who has scars probably has experienced loss
Mhm.
of something in their lives. How have you processed the emotions
Mm.
around limits and loss, and what that scar means?
Mm. Thank you. That's a great question. Well, first of all, for me, what I've learned from really not being effective at processing is to acknowledge and feel that emotion, and then to ask what's behind it. And I think that, yes, my scars represent trauma. I think that's a really good connection. And the issue, of course, is, like you said, have I processed that trauma? And for me, that's going through the feelings that I'm experiencing when I look at the scars. And, the scars bring me back to the place
Yeah.
lots of times. And sometimes I have flashbacks in hospitals, or certain shaving cream, I'll be putting it on, kind of like a scar. It's like a reminder of what happened. Like like with the shaving
Yes.
cream, I'm back in. I have tubes coming out of me. I'm in a mirror shaving, and it's the first
Yes.
time I've shaved since surgery. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So it's like a flashback. And so I think for me, it's to give myself permission to understand that that is a normal response, is the fact that this has been trauma in my life, is to recognize, yeah, this has been trauma, and then to explore my inner world. Like, what am I feeling about that? And I think for me, I really like the heart check that we have from recovery. It's associated with not with struggling with relapse, but I find it helpful for exploring my inner world. But
Hmm.
it's H, am I hurting? E, am I exhausted? A, am I angry? R, am I resentful? And T, am I tense?
Hmm.
There's a lot of emotions described within there.
Hmm.
And I think that's helpful for me to recognize what I'm feeling. And some of it with the scars of my cancer scars is it's sadness, it's loss. It's also tense, anxious. Like, am I going to go through this again?
Well, that's the one I want to explore a touch,
Yeah.
because that's what stuck out to me. Is I'm glad you said you talked about the tense on the out of the heart check. And I'm going to ask a question that's slightly different, but it's in the same ballpark. And since we're doing this on the cuff, I can make up whatever I want here, right? But
That's right. No rules.
no rules. Well, and the question is, what am I avoiding? Because what I've found in myself, and I'll give an example, is that if you were to, and you know this, that I've said this at least you did before, is that if you were to go to my high school yearbook, you won't find my pictures in the places they're supposed to be.
That's right. Yeah.
And so there are areas that I chose to not be there because I wasn't enough. That the scars told me, hey, you don't want to be in those pictures. You don't want to show yourself. And not being enough is big. And so whenever I think about scars, if they represent great pain or they represent something in your life in that way, that there's a story, what are you avoiding? Or what part of your daily routine in your life has to be changed to manage the feeling that comes from what you just described as, hey, when you're in front of the mirror and that flashback comes. And I've used different examples of, I have different fears that are inside of me that cause me to modify my actions. So it'd be like the best example you could think of is somebody who has fear of water. They're not likely going to go out in a boat with you and go do those kind of activities. Why? That fear of water is going to cause them to say, hey, I'm going to try to stay as far away from that. Their actions are going to be that. And so that's the same thing as me not having my picture taken. And my family will tell you that I hate to have my picture taken, and they struggle with that. And so to be here today and to be filmed for this podcast is a form of almost therapy of overcoming that scar.
Mm-hmm.
But I have to recognize there's a feeling and where it comes from, and then recognize, then I have to identify, but what's true and what's real. But there's a process that one has to walk through. I mean, so I'm going to put back the question is like that tense is an example of, is there something that when I think about that scar, or that scar reminds me, that brings attention, or something I'm avoiding, or changes how I live my life? And if the answer is yes, is it healthy?
Are you asking me? Darn.
You're the host. I'm setting you up.
I was hoping to avoid that.
I'm setting you up.
The anxiety is related with the trauma and the hardness of what it was like to go through these massive surgeries, and being told I was going to pass and all that. Cancer has, I don't want it to be Peter is a cancer patient. I want it to be Peter is a father, Peter is a husband, he's a Christian, he's a ministry leader, he's all these different things.
Yeah.
Peter's a good brother, but this cancer journey I had to leave my law practice, go on disability.
Mm-hmm.
Which has changed my standard of living, all that kind of stuff. It's changed. And because of that, it's changed what I do and my focus in life. It's steered it into a completely different direction. The having to face death has been traumatic. It's had a positive side, but also a negative side. And so I think looking at these scars is like looking at that point when I had that scar. It wasn't just a surgery. It wasn't just cancer. It was, hey, we're not sure we got it all. And hey, we didn't get it all. And this is what we found. And long recoveries, painful, difficult recoveries, and my body changing in many ways. And yet, I'm going to say this, as I look at those scars, I think, wow, I'm such a different person than I would have been without this journey. And I think I can honestly say a better person, a richer person, a person who's been humbled in a good way, a man of faith, a man who's dependent on his higher power, Jesus, which would not have happened in the other scenario of, I'll paint it for you, successful lawyer. I went through a divorce, as you know, but let's say the marriage kept going, happily married, successful lawyer, prominent in the community, busy with lawyering his life, all that stuff, which is fine. But I think for me, deep satisfaction in life has come with ministry opportunities I've always wanted to do, and having the time and the space and even the energy because of these scars to pursue a meaningful, since when did I ever think that I would speak to many people about how God can come alongside in a cancer journey?
So do you have to do that consciously? Because what's the first thing that hits your mind when you see the scars? As you're getting ready for your shower, if you see these scars, what's the first thing that hits your mind?
It's, wow, look at them. Look at what has become because of these scars. I don't go through the whole process, but there's been loss, yes, but there's been great riches because of it. My life has changed in such a better way.
Yeah, I'm going to propose.
Yeah, propose it.
That that's only if you've worked through those feelings of trauma.
Yep.
And have processed that. And since it's a Cancer and Peace podcast, you've now find peace when you see the scars. If you don't work that process, those scars are likely going to remind you of the negative.
Right.
You're saying, hey, they did have pain and suffering attached to them, and now they have a deeper meaning.
Yeah, for me, I'm really not in control. And I turn my life and will over to a God who is in control. And that actually brings me peace.
I find it, what strikes me as you're saying this, and I'm going to go all religious here for a second, is Jesus, when he came back after the resurrection, you would expect to hear a resurrected body that was perfect. But he asked the disciples to put their hands on those scars or where he had been crucified, and to see his side where he was pierced. And those scars represented something, and it could be looked at from two directions. For one direction, the the suffering that he just went through. And I think he was actually asking them to look at the beauty of those scars, of how much they mattered to him, that they were worth it. And they were worth something that was very, very painful. And I think that's something to think about for our own scars, is like what message is being sent. So that's why I was curious whenever I asked you, when you see those scars, what's the first message? Because it can be looked at from either angle. Greatest suffering or greatest joy. And I think the only way you get to greatest joy is to know the meaning of those scars. It's not to, because if there's no meaning to the scar, all it represents is suffering.
Right. That's a great point that I wasn't even thinking about.
It wasn't either until about 2 minutes ago.
Pierced hands and feet. Because those scars are still there.
Yeah.
Like, why wouldn't they just be erased?
Yeah.
There's a whole purpose and meaning behind those scars. So in other words, reminders. There's a whole meaning and purpose behind reminders.
And there's something deeply beautiful in those scars. And I say deeply beautiful is it's a deep expression of God's love. And cancer itself doesn't feel like a deep expression of love on the surface. But experiencing deep, we talked about joy in the previous episode there, experiencing deep love and relationship as you go through the suffering of cancer can be the greatest point in people's lives, because we know that this concept of the wall, the dark night of the soul, is the tool that God uses to draw us into the deepest part of ourselves in relationship with him. And so the moment you think of cancer being the wall, the very tool that God's using to draw you into the deepest part of relationship with him, then those scars look quite a bit different, I think.
Yeah.
I think they are for my own life, at least. I don't look at them as...
No, I think you're right. I think it gets back to, are we bouncing off the wall or going through it? And I think if we bounce off the wall of suffering and pain, we don't look at the scars the same way as if we went through the wall. And for a Christian, for me, it's growing in dependence and intimacy on Jesus as he shows me things about myself as I go through the wall. And I'm a different person having gone through the wall. Yeah.
I was thinking about bouncing off the wall for the scars on my neck would be to get cosmetic surgery.
Yes.
In other words, to put a smiley face on something and saying, well, no, there's nothing there to see. It all looks good now.
Right.
But it would not erase the emotional scars. It wouldn't erase.
Do you know what's else is interesting about that scar is I never noticed. I mean, I've known you a long time. I've never looked at your neck saying it's scarred. So you had to actually highlight that to me and then talk about what was behind it. Like, I didn't know anything about that.
That's interesting. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there are some that do, and it makes like, hey, what are those white dots on your neck? What is that there for? Yeah.
What do the scars mean to us?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just think it's interesting. What you just described, though, of bouncing off the wall is really good. So bouncing off the wall is to not process that pain and to not come to purpose.
Right.
And we talked about purpose, even it just seems to be a recurring theme. But bouncing off the wall on scars is to not get to the purpose of that deeper pain that was part of this journey.
Right.
And I think that's probably something to really think about embracing.
You know, even like my divorce, which I think has an emotional scarring to it. I've processed a lot of that, and I think Leslie has too, but we've been together a couple times and it's been great. I think our relationship is very good. It's very friendly. So I think we've both done some work in that area to process.
Yes, you went through and you
were scarred, but
you went through anger, sadness, and loss.
Yes.
And you processed anger, sadness. You didn't stuff it.
Right.
You felt it.
Right.
you lived it,
Yep.
and you've gone through that grieving cycle. And I think that's we've done a grieving podcast here before, and I think that's a big part of a scar is representative of something that probably had loss or great pain in it, and to
Yes.
grieve.
Yeah, and I did my recovery testimony for a church a week ago, and I go into the grieving associated with divorce and that kind of thing, and I wept from up front,
Yeah.
cried, and so I know that because I gave myself permission to feel up there, and so I know that that's still part of processing and dealing with that scar, or that event that caused the scar. But
So was that sadness or joy, though, that you felt when you wept?
it was sadness, but also a recognition of the fact that we still are talking and we still have a relationship. It's just different.
Yeah, I was curious, not that you would feel joyful in one sense, but is
Right.
one of the things I thought was interesting about our conversation related to that loss is that you had to experience sadness. You had to go through and grieve that with sadness, and then, but there's a form of joy now in the fact that you were able to reflect on the beauty of what God did in that relationship, and that there's not bitterness now, and that as there's no bitterness, there's room for relationship to be not restored the way it was necessarily, but at least that there can be relationship. And so in other words, there's a level of restoration that allows there to be joy in the gifts that God has given in the midst of that.
Right.
And you get some great gifts out of this thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Great gifts out of it. I think about like going through what we hate in order to get what we will love. It's this concept of purpose again. I think it's like, okay, this thing is terrible that I'm going through, but it's going to bring about something if I process it and go through the wall with my higher power, Jesus Christ. It'll produce something in me that will be beautiful. Because things that are beautiful, like, why do we love to hear stories about people that have been through suffering and they're different because of it? It's because there's a certain beauty within them. You know what I'm saying?
Every great story has a component of hardship and overcoming. A great story has hardship and overcoming. Otherwise, we would have no interest in our human, that pattern.
And I think the person who's processed it well is a humble, grateful person. There's a humility and a gratitude somewhere in there, and I think that's beautiful.
I think you're right. And so when we think about scars, it should elicit feelings. And those feelings can be of great sadness and loss. And if that's where it's at today, that's okay. Finish feeling that sadness and loss, and understand that it's not without purpose, though. And when you connect with purpose and you see the joy of what's on the other side, and it's similar to Jesus showing his hands to the disciples, is yes, there was great loss. There was something that was traumatic that happened in death, but there was great purpose. And I think that's for all of us, our suffering has great purpose. And as we lean into that, then we can look at those scars, and when there's peace, when we see that purpose, and there's joy, and then there's hope. And those are all the other side that come with scars. And then the scars aren't ugly, they're beautiful. And I think that's something that I love, that there's a contemporary song that's called Scars that I love, and because it really speaks to that. Thank you for the scars, because when you see the beauty in them, then there's something big to embrace. And I think there shouldn't be a cancer patient out there who's experience the scar of that when they embrace their purpose, that they could find that same joy.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's good. My sister and brother-in-law were in a rock slide that Mount St. Helens had triggered back in 1980. And she was pregnant and they lost that child. And they were not supposed to live that night. And then her leg swung out and was hit by rocks, and so things were torn away from it.
Mm-hmm.
She was supposed to have her leg taken off. And of course they have relationships with the Lord and were really looking to his purpose through this whole thing. But she kept that leg, and that leg is chewed up.
Mm-hmm.
And she displays that leg at times, but she has this whole story behind it. And when I look at the leg, I just think, I'm transported back to when I got the news of that they were in this place. You know, they were airlifted, they were on TV, all that. And it happened, in 1980, what is that, 43 years ago? But still, they still talk about it like it was yesterday. Like,
I bet, yeah.
And it's this, it's really bragging about what God did for them in it. And they have repercussions from it still to this day, but it's a big scar.
Yes, it can either debilitate though, or it can also bring. I'll give one more story in this, but it's not mine; it's my wife's, and she has a scar on the front of her leg on the lower part there on her shin, and it represents she had her foot was off kilter when she was born, and so they put her in braces for several years. So she had was kind of made fun of for wearing these funny brace shoes for a long period of time. But as she was going into grade school, they broke her leg and reset it. And when they did it, they created this monster scar. It was actually on her knee, but as she grew, it moved down to her leg. So it was always right here on the front of her leg and her shin. And you would think that the trauma would likely be being made fun of by the kids in school. And there was some that she had to go through. But one of the things that she remembers the most was she had I think it was her first grade teacher who she took time to walk through with the rest of the kids what was going on in the surgery. And they used it not as a make fun of, but as hey, here's the wonder of what's happening in the surgery. And here's and it was almost as if they shared in the experience together.
Wow.
Of her healing. And she was like, wow, I so loved having a teacher that cared enough about me. And so she has this great memory of a teacher who cared enough for her to love her in that way.
Wow.
And I was like, yeah, that's such a cool thing. And there's negativity of that, but she has something that she could grasp hold of that showed great meaning and purpose. And so for all of us, I think we can probably look at some of those things.
Yeah. And it's the reminders are on a spectrum. Some of them may still be very negative.
Yeah.
And the encouragement there is there's probably work to do with that, to process that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the case. I think for all of us, you can always look at a scar from one of two directions, but you probably can't get to the second unless you feel those feelings and work through.
Does that scar from your brother remind you of your relationship with your brother?
It reminds me of growing up a bit, and we were pretty crazy and wild, and so it's not such a negative thing. I laugh at it when I see it now. It does remind me of just how crazy we were, and you can think about teenage boys that were like rough and tumble and getting it on. That scar reminds me of that, and it's not a negative thing because and I always I never actually showed this to my parents because I didn't want them to know that we were in this knife out thing, but because I think they would have freaked out a bit. But that's why there's a scars. It should have had stitches, and it probably wouldn't have been that bad. But I just put a Band-Aid over and covered it up and moved on. And it reminds me of some good things there too. I guess my point is I don't think of it as it was just, but we were aggressive and rough and tumble. So I think I have good memories with this. Yeah.
Scars are reminders.
The reminders.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully you've picked up something from this that has some
Hopefully.
understanding. Well, I think the thought about Jesus still keeping his scars is
that's
such
powerful.
a deep and powerful something as I think about that. And so your scars have deep meaning, but they're not just physical, they're emotional. And how you've processed that is going to give you the lens for how you can view that. And so I loved your original share there about seeing and what's the first thing you think of when you see your own scars. And so we'll leave that question with you. Hey, what do you see when you see your scars? And the hope that in seeing them, that there's something beautiful. We'll call it a wrap there. Thank you for listening to Cancer and
Thanks,
Peace.
everyone.
Loved being able to share this. Have a great one.